think there's a bunch of things that we're focused on for the account executive, and it's really about sort of building a relationship. But I do think there are a lot of opportunities for being intelligent with where and how you engage customers. I think there's actually a lot of a lot of data that exists out there that is there's too much of it for a person to make sense of. There's too much to even categorize before you go to make sense of it. And so I think there's this opportunity where LLMs and AI broadly is great at summarization. It's one of the strong points. And so I think when you look at kind of areas where there's just this kind of fire hose of data for folks, those are kind of the opportunities where I think there's a lot of upside. And I think the other thing that's been really exciting about AI for me personally is looking through this lens of automating kind of pieces of a job. Whereas if you look before and existing enterprise software, Workday, Salesforce, ServiceNow, and these companies, it's really more of a kind of historical transaction log of things that a person has done. It's sort of almost like the work about the work. You don't actually log into these products all that often to do the work. The work happens in other tools. It happens in meetings, et cetera. And so I think one of the really interesting opportunities in AI is that you can actually look, and this is what we did when we were first thinking about sort of the ideas that became Poggio, was like, literally, what does a seller do all day? What are like the discrete tasks that they go about day to day? And kind of came up with a thesis for which parts of those are automatable and which aren't. And I actually think the latter question is an underrated and actually potentially more important question, which is, what are the pieces of a process that a person has to be there? And I think when you look through that lens, there's still this gigantic list of things that AI can automate, and it's really about how do you take those off of someone's plate to give them leverage for the piece that is uniquely human or uniquely requires a human to be doing. So I think that's the lens that we've looked at, and I think when you apply that across not even just sales, that it's applicable in every job, because it's the nature of automation. But I think that's been the really interesting part of LLM.
All right. Welcome to episode 6 of the East Peak podcast, where we interview the operators, leaders, and startup founders that make the go-to-market and tech world go round. Today, I have the privilege of interviewing Matt Slotnick, co-founder and CEO of Poggio Labs. Welcome, Matt.
Hey, Stuart. Glad to be here.
Glad to have you as well. Okay. So maybe to get started, how would you like to introduce yourself, and maybe just a quick blurb about what Poggio Labs is?
Yeah, that sounds great. So I'm Matt, co-founder, CEO of Poggio Labs. Poggio Labs is an AI sales workspace. We have built a product for sales reps that accelerates the end-to-end workflow of a deal from initial outreach to close. And we've put a bunch of work into taking the power of LLMs and bringing them to sales reps.
Very cool. So, so far on these podcasts I've done, they've been concentrated a lot of times with like domain specialists, whether it's people I've had the privilege of working with like enablement and marketing and elsewhere. But one of the reasons I really wanted to bring you on is, because you have this surface area with so many salespeople, I thought it would be so interesting to bring on because other companies I've worked with and advised, it's very often, technical founders, and then they kind of begrudgingly one of them gets pulled into doing founder-led sales. They like learn the ropes and then kind of figure it out. But because your product is serving sellers and sales leaders, the questions I'm seeing you ask in LinkedIn as you're kind of semi-building in public is super interesting. Kind of just seeing someone navigate the idea maze as an outsider for the sales world. So really excited to have that conversation. So maybe before we dive into that and some of the most interesting things you learned, I know you've kind of lived all over the country and you've had lots of variances in your career so far, everything from like iBanking to Google. I know you grew up in upstate New York, but how did you come to end up here on the West Coast and end up in startup life?
Yeah, so I went to school in Boston. I originally from upstate New York. We moved around a bunch growing up. Ended up back in upstate New York before going to Boston for school. During college, decided about halfway through that I wanted to be an investment banker, and ended up doing that. Just so happened that the firm I worked at, a firm called Shea and Company, which was a Boston and San Francisco based investment bank, was focused entirely on enterprise software. And so I kind of came in. I was like, hey, I want to be an investment banker. Was doing enterprise software exclusively, and pretty quickly realized that I loved enterprise software. And so that sort of changed the trajectory of what I'd been thinking of doing, which prior to that was kind of pure finance, and thought I'd go work at a hedge fund in Manhattan for the rest of my life. But really fell in love with enterprise software, and so the kind of progression of my career afterwards was really kind of based on this idea of, well, if you like software and you really like these companies, how do you get closer and closer to the products and the companies and the people? And so that sort of took me from investment banking to venture capital. So I joined Norwest Venture Partners, moved from Boston to San Francisco for that, and spent 3.5 years investing in early stage software companies. And there kind of developed a relative expertise in sort of infrastructure, security, developer tools, quite technical products. Did that for 3.5 years. Got to the point that I really had to decide, like, hey, do I want to be a VC for the rest of my life or not? And wasn't ready to take that jump at that point. So ended up joining Google Cloud on a product team, and spent close to 4 years there working in a variety of roles, sort of product focused, but really kind of spanning the business from M&A, strategic partnerships. Had the opportunity to actually build a business unit from scratch at GCP, um, and really, you know, thought I'd be there for 2 years. Ended up being there for four, and along the way had the idea for what then became Poggio. And for me, I think the common thread, a lot of these experiences sort of make sense when you look in reverse. But for me, it was really I like enterprise software, and I want to kind of take this one step at a time and go in a direction of what feels interesting. And for me, that was software, and how I was sort of practicing that on a day to day basis, whether it was as banker, investor, product, M&A, and now as a founder, sort of wasn't really optimizing for that. And so it kind of brought me from interesting opportunity to interesting opportunity, and here we are.
Love it. That's pretty cool. Going from iBanking to being exposed and learning the ropes with enterprise software, and then being in the world of VC and learning about supporting sellers. So very cool. So, um, pivoting into that, I know in your blurb, you just talked about, how you're supporting sellers and things like that. And we talk about some of the discrete use cases and stuff as you expand your offering, but what are some of the things, like when you're querying LinkedIn and you're asking peers or people like me that you're talking to, like, what are some of the things like some of the most like non-obvious things or most surprising things you found in talking to sellers and go-to-market professionals so far?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. One, I wouldn't necessarily say is a surprise, but I think people underestimate really the core of the sales job is about relationships. I think people have this idea of a seller as someone that kind of shows up with a bag, and there's a product in a bag, and you just kind of almost feel like some people think you're sort of tricking your customers into buying things. And I think one of the things that you realize very quickly is very few products and industries operate that way. It's really about trust and relationships. And I think when you look at sales in that way, I think it's a very different take than I think the average person would have on it. Especially, I think, not to pick on sort of engineers and things like that, but I think you go to engineers at some of these big companies, and I was at Google, and I think you ask an engineer what a salesperson does, and they really don't have much of an idea. And I think as we've talked to now hundreds and hundreds of sales reps, it's really about how do I show up and earn the trust of my customer to really solve a problem for them, and that's how you sell. And it's really not this transactional, show up and sell it and move on to the next one. The world doesn't really work like that anymore.
Totally makes sense. I think that's a trap that a lot of people have gotten into when they prescribe, whether it's for SDRs or higher volume sales, this kind of outreach sales loft Apollo thing, where it's just like, oh, an input is fungible, like an email is an email is an email, and more should be more, should see more output. But I think that's a big reason you're seeing like response rates plummet because it's just crowding out the space because it does come back to that relationship and like earning the right to have the conversation for sure. Um, yeah. So obviously you're taking advantage of the explosion in like the LLM space that's occurred. Really, as an outsider, it seems like it only like broke into my personal awareness a year ago now. But like obviously, many people have talked about how the LLM paradigm has the capacity to disrupt, if not change, selling in a pretty major way. What other areas do you think are like ripe for disruption in selling, or observations you've had where you're like, as an outsider, like, how is this still the case? Like, I really think there's an opportunity there.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a bunch of things that we're focused on for the account executive, and it's really about sort of building a relationship. But I do think there are a lot of opportunities for being intelligent with where and how you engage customers. I think there's actually um, a lot of data that exists out there that is there's too much of it for a person to make sense of. There's too much to even categorize before you go to make sense of it. And so I think there's this opportunity where LLMs and AI broadly is great at summarization. It's one of the strong points. And so I think when you look at kind of areas where there's just this kind of fire hose of data for folks,
Hmm.
um, those are kind of the opportunities where I think there's a lot of upside. And I think the other thing that's been really exciting about AI for me personally is looking through this lens of automating kind of pieces of a job. Whereas if you look before and existing enterprise software, Workday, Salesforce, ServiceNow, and these companies,
Hmm.
it's really more of a kind of historical transaction log of things that a person has done. It's sort of almost like the work about the work. You don't actually log into these products all that often to do the work. The work happens in other tools. It happens in meetings, et cetera. And so I think one of the really interesting opportunities in AI is that you can actually look, and this is what we did when we were first thinking about sort of the ideas that became Poggio, was like literally, what does a seller do all day? What are like the discrete tasks that they go about day to day? And kind of came up with a thesis for which parts of those are automatable and which aren't. And I actually think the latter question is an underrated and actually potentially more important question, which is what are the pieces of a process that a person has to be there? And I think when you look through that lens, there's still this gigantic list of things that AI can automate, and it's really about how do you take those off of someone's plate to give them leverage for the piece that is uniquely human or uniquely requires a human to be doing. So I think that's the lens that we've looked at, and I think when you apply that across not even just sales, it's applicable in every job because it's the nature of automation. But I think that's been the really interesting part of LLMs to me.
Interesting. Yeah, I really like your comment about like the work about work because I was yeah, just the other day we were talking about um an earlier stage startup in this investor's portfolio, and they were talking about in the board meeting that they were having a really hard time with like CRM compliance, and it's like, how do you get them to do that? And I was like, well, maybe you should put the shoe on the other foot and have some empathy for the buyer. And you're like, clearly, like, yes, you could be like more dictatorial to it, but like, it has to be that part of the reason they're not doing this is they're not actually getting any value out of it in their process, like whatsoever. And so you need to ask yourself, you're like, why is that not delivering any value for them? Um,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's one of these things where if you go and ask a seller, what do you actually do in Salesforce, and pick on Salesforce just because it's more
Hmm.
familiar. But if you actually look at the sales job, very little of it happens in Salesforce. Maybe you do CPQ, you kind of enter your notes and stuff like that, but it's really kind of backwards looking. And it's really not a product that's built to help an account executive sell. And I think that's, it's probably a common refrain, but I think there's something that's just fundamentally broken about that.
Totally. I really liked your thought process of like analyzing like in the salesperson's like day to day stack, like what can or should be automated. Because I wrote an essay a little while back. It was like, is are a lot of these jobs when it comes to LLMs, like, are they going to be like a draftsman or engineer, or is it going to be like a teller? And that, like, it used to be if you were like a civil engineer or an architect, like you had an army of entry level people tabulating by hand calculations, doing draft work and things like that for you. Um, or there's certain roles that actually like have expanded with that. I think the sales role, like we've seen a reduction in CS, we've seen a huge reduction in SDRs. Like I think it's probably going to collapse down to that very competent enterprise salesperson. It would be my guess, I think.
Yeah, I share that view. I think this is another one of the things that we learned and have seen over the last, call it year and a half, was as companies started to whatever phrase you want to use, cut costs, get more efficient, get
Hmm.
more lean. I think what you've sort of seen was, and as we're talking to sellers, there was real frustration because you're looking at sort of quotas and annual numbers that were not changing. Meanwhile, sales team headcount was getting cut by 30%. Sales engineering was getting cut. SDRs were being cut. All of a sudden, you'd see these sales folks who in 2021 would have maybe 60, 80 accounts that they cover, a lot of whom were inbound or sourced by SDRs, to now, hey, you've got 200 accounts to cover, and by the way, you don't have as much SDR coverage anymore, so you're now responsible for outbound. And by the way, your number's not changing, so good luck. And I think there was this sense of real kind of almost like disillusionment with the whole equation, and I think that's something that we've seen across the board, and I think it's continued.
Hmm.
And I think you see that this is for sales. It's across the board really, and I do think that one of the things that we thought a lot about when we were first coming up with the idea for Poggio, and this has continued and I would say has gotten stronger, is are you in the business of automating a person away, or are you in the business of human amplification? And I think personally, I find the latter a lot more interesting. I think there's a lot of people, and there's obviously going to be big opportunities in automating people away in certain jobs. But I find that just from a human perspective, a lot less interesting. And I think the thing that I love about sales, as I was sort of talking about before, is at the end of the day, there's a handshake that happens and a delivery of a service and a value that's delivered. And you can get a lot of leverage into that process, but that handshake, like, you don't handshake with a robot, you handshake with a person. And I think that's one of the things that's been really, really exciting about how this has developed for us, and even just how we think about the market that we're playing and what this looks like in 1, 2, 5, 10 years.
Love it. I think like tangentially an area that is like really ripe for disruption that needs to be fixed with that is like you were talking about a lot of angst, and I've been party to that too. And previous cycles where it's like since SaaSmageddon kicked off and you've got similar targets to the board, but the reality on what people are buying has changed. There's seat contraction even at places at Salesforce, which is just like never has happened. And yet, the people that have a 50% variable comp, uh, like, yeah, it's just kind of interesting. Like I've been through enough annual planning processes that it's like so divorced from reality in terms of what they can do. It's kind of like a figure it out thing. So I think in complementary to what you're doing, I think there's like a lot of room for creating actual predictive, like productivity models, like rep productivity and getting signals and stuff to kind of complement what you're doing from like the rep perspective as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's the nice thing. The blessing and a curse, there's too much data. But if you can make sense of it, there's a lot you can do there. And I think there's only going to be more and more products that throw off data, like ours included. Like we will
Mm-hmm.
also be exhaust for other products that, it's like these things build on each other. And I think, for those folks that can figure out a way to harness it, there's some like real advantages to doing that well.
Makes sense. So maybe like zooming out to get your perspective, with the finance background and being it with one foot in the AI space, um, it seems like we're maybe kind of entering a bit of a post-hype part of the generative AI cycle. Um, I've kind of heard that some of these companies, they were told last year to give generative AI like a good look, and the feedback we've given or they've been told is like we don't really necessarily have a a place for this in its current maturity. Either B, it's not enterprise ready, or C, for larger enterprises, you can have injection attacks and it's just not security ready. Like, what are you kind of seeing? Like, what's your take on kind of the hype cycle, like the Gartner curve?
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that. You see, there's uh, a lot of publicity about AI. It's sort of I think one of the things that comes up a lot is most companies have some sort of board mandate to figure out how to use AI to make things better. Um, a lot of the sort of planning on those sort of mandates ends shortly after that declarative statement.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot of desire to harness these tools. I think people are dabbling. There's budget for dabbling. I think we are really, really early in the adoption cycle, and I think it's sometimes hard for people to realize that because they've seen all of the dollars that are going into it, and you see these big numbers quoted. I think the thing that's pretty interesting about that is the majority of that revenue and the kind of budgets and things like that we've seen, and you look at OpenAI's run rate, they're making a lot of money, but a lot of this stuff is kind of at the infrastructure layer, and it's buildup of training and capacity and the LLMs themselves. And if you actually look at the kind of net new applications that leverage AI at the core, there's really only been about a year that you could even be building these things. And so I think
Right.
when you look at it from that point of view and you look at the kind of end user value that's going to accrue, like I don't even think that game has really started. And so I think there's a lot to come there. And the one thing I will say is there is a lot of desire, but there are a lot of question marks. Even we talk about this internally all the time. It's like the nouns and the verbs for how you use AI don't even exist. And
Right.
so I think there's just so much market development to happen. I think the one thing that I do really believe though is that the thing that's different about this than was different than the last generation of cloud, is that you're really talking about amplifying the ability for people to do their jobs. And it's not just a Salesforce seat tax, that's this flat fee that you pay for everyone. It's like, look, you can actually go and show this makes you 30% more productive. You added X number of new opportunities. Your deals are closing faster. Like this process used to take every single sales rep for every single deal 5 hours. And like, boom, click a button. That took 90 seconds. And then they get and go spend 10 minutes making it better. And so you really do have these dramatic improvements to process in the day to day. And so I think people are getting glimpses of that, and that's where a lot of the kind of appetite for these solutions comes from. But as far as deployment, I think we're in like the first inning, the top of the first inning just started.
Totally. I think it's tricky just, any relatively general purpose technology. It's like, where do you put it? It's like saying like, oh, our board is telling us to make use of electricity. Like, what do you do with
Yeah,
that? So, um,
absolutely.
I mean, the thing I think is so cool about what you guys are doing, that it's just like it clicks immediately. You're like, okay, when I was a seller or supporting sellers, it's just like, oh, I know the pain about doing a really thorough job of preparing for your call, doing your territory mapping and stuff. It's like straightforward. I think like as these use cases are applied, it like makes more sense. But yeah, Carletta Perez and her pretty famous book, it's like Technological Revolutions and Financial Capital, I think it's called, just talks about these like adoption curves. And pretty much the premise is whether it's the railroad or electricity or whatever, it draws in so much capital in the hype cycle. The majority of those businesses crash, a la the '01 tech crash, but all that hype and investment laid the infrastructure groundwork for the future. So we still have fiber in the ground
Yeah.
from that. You've got all this railroad coverage from that. Like I kind of think that all the VC money sloshing around because they missed out on the big players in this round, like will kind of be planting the seed for something we'll see run for 20, 50 years. It's gonna be awesome. So
Yep, I agree.
obviously, I alluded to it a little earlier, but you've been kind of not like building in public per se, but engaging on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Like, how have you been finding that going, and how are you avoiding the cringe trap?
So I'm asking all my friends and family to help keep me honest on the cringe trap because I don't know what I want to be when I grow up, but I don't think it's a LinkedIn poster. But yeah, I think it's actually been a lot of fun. I think one of the core principles of how we've been building Poggio is really centered around like we want to build a product that sales reps love. And I think love is kind of a funny word to use about software, but people have started to say about our product, which is awesome. You build an AI product for sellers, and someone says, "Hey, I love that. Changes the way I work." Like I think that's been really energizing. But the way you get there is by talking to a lot of sales reps, and that's calls, that's text messages, that's just posting things on LinkedIn and seeing like, look, what do you hate about your job? Um, and what we've kind of found is that a lot of the things that people hate about their job are things that are repetitive. They don't feel like they add a lot of value. They're things that, hey, my boss told me to do this. The kind of like ingredients to build, a good example is sort of account planning. I think people pretty universally don't like account planning, not because of the concept of the account plan, but because of the work that goes into it and the fact that you're kind of told to do it and then it doesn't really serve you for the rest of the year. It kind of sits on the shelf. And so, but when you actually look at the things that go into building these, whether it's an account plan or a PowerPoint presentation to go walk your customer through, the process is really valuable. The underlying, like, I'm going to go Google for 4 hours to figure out what this company has announced, that is not fun. And so it turns out that a lot of those things that are really boring to people, the rote tasks that are just like kind of mind numbing, the LLMs are great at that, which is kind of a nice little coincidence there. And so, one of the things that we've tried to do is really just go out and talk to sales reps, and sales reps live in a lot of places, but most of them spend a good amount of time on LinkedIn. And so that's where we've done a conscious job of just spending time there, because that's where we get the feedback.
Makes sense. Yeah, it's a place you don't want to spend a lot of time, but you end up yeah, spend a lot of time on LinkedIn as sales or GTM for sure. So cool. Well, I know just you don't have to dip too much into personal life, but I know you and I met each other through cycling, and if you know, you know. But for those of whom that don't, the name of your company is kind of an homage to a famous climb in cycling. What effect has cycling had on your life in terms of being a founder and work and otherwise?
Yeah, quite a big effect actually. I think for me, there's just countless lessons from cycling that apply. I see them everywhere. Once you kind of get them in your head, you see them in work, you see them in life, all these different places. But I think for me, one of the things that as a founder is hard is there's like a lot of ups and downs, and you really have to think long term, and you have to be patient when patience is the right answer, and then you have to be aggressive when certain things present themselves. The emergence of AI, I would say, is an example of the latter. The time to strike, or the time to, in cycling terms, attack, kind of presents itself, and if you haven't been preparing for that, you're going to miss it, right? And I think with cycling, people is kind of one of these fairly esoteric sports, I would say, but I think a lot of it, look, it's an endurance sport. You got to go ride for 6 hours, and you can win or lose a race based on what happens at hour 5 minute 37, and if you miss it for 30 seconds, you could lose a race, and so it's really about preparedness, and really just listening to yourself and trusting yourself, and looking at the finish line, which is the homage to the Poggio. It's really all about that. It's what's your goal, and making sure you don't blow yourself up too early before you get there,
Or break a frame in half.
or break a frame in half.
All right. Great. So, we'll do a kind of wrap up here with a final couple questions, but what advice, whether when you were on the investing side of the table or as a founder, do you find to be generally like bad advice?
So I think a lot about this, often because when I got into venture capital, it was pretty funny because I think I was 24 at the time, and I'd been an investment banker, and then all of a sudden you show up as a VC, and you've got this business card and this $1.2 billion fund behind you, and then all of a sudden these entrepreneurs like ask you for advice, and they listen to you. I was like, well, yesterday I was an investment banker, and today I have this business card, and all of a sudden my advice is valuable, and quite honestly, I have no idea what I'm talking about. And the reason I bring that up is because I actually find that the majority of pretty tailored or specific advice that you hear about startups is generally wrong, and it's wrong because it's an overfit. And I've
Mm,
actually found that the majority of advice is really kind of like frameworks for decision making and questions.
mm,
And I think this is, one of the things that when you have a board as a company is just phenomenally valuable is just having a literally a sounding board. Say like, hey, here's what we're thinking of. Like, what do you think? And good board members usually tell you what they think. They'll give you some anecdotes maybe, and then
mm-hmm,
they leave you to go make the decision. And so I
mm-hmm.
actually just cringe a lot of the time when I go back and read a lot of startup advice because even if it's right for someone in some specific scenario, the chances of it being right for you in your scenario are like pretty slim. And so I found that a lot of startup advice that you read online is just it's just a massive overfit, and to the point that it's just not helpful at best, and can often be destructive.
Totally makes sense. Beware of the advice coming from the Patagonia vest crew. You know. Yeah. Actually, like as a quick tangent, like what are your thoughts on like assembling a board now that you've both assembled one, you've been on the other side? Like I've heard a lot of advice on what works, what's not. Do you have any heuristics or mental like rules of thumb you like?
So I would say, having a board, people have different takes on this. I think, especially if you kind of roll the clock back maybe 3 years, the 2021 days, and you would read a lot of advice of, hey, get as much money as you can, take as little dilution as you can, and avoid board members. That was something that a lot of people would tell you. We sort of, we did raise money in 2021, but we kind of took the opposite approach. Is like, give me the board member. Like I want good board members because
Mm-hmm.
we're here to build something long, and I want the hard questions, right? Like the longer you avoid the hard questions, the worse off you are. And so for us, it was really around just really having people that were bought into the future of the company. And there's really no better way than getting smart people on your board. The flip side of that is, you get the wrong folks on your board, and it can add a lot of friction to everything that you do across the company. And so, obviously, not something to be taken lightly. But I'm now 2.5 years into this. I think our decision, at least in my view, has really paid off because it forces you to answer the hard questions, and you're going to have to answer them sometime. And so, maybe you have some of those uncomfortable conversations early. But that's what we're here for. It's not supposed to be easy. And so, you want those people on your side, and also honestly to help develop that relationship over the years, because, like when you start to get into the growth stages and some of these decisions that you make, it's awesome to have rapport with folks over years that really know your working style, rather than, you know, eventually you can add a board member at the growth stage, and you got to get up to speed. So I think having people that have seen you operate and seen how you make decisions over a long period of time is actually tremendously helpful.
Makes sense. Very cool. Okay, great. Well, that's it for me, Matt. If for those of whom that are sellers, sales leaders, or like operators listening that want to learn more, how can they best get a hold of you to learn more about Poggio Labs?
Best thing is you can go add me on LinkedIn. I spend way too much time there, or just shoot me an email, matt@poggiolabs.com.
Love it. Okay, Matt, thanks for the time.
Thanks, Stuart.